Yes, thank you very much for the lovely introduction and also for the invitation. We are very happy to be here today. You see, we've brought a special surprise guest, and David will explain later why suddenly hitchBOT is here. And let me start by talking about our talk today is going to be about hitchBOT, but also about cultural robotics. That's a field David and I are working together on. We coined the term together, and we want to talk about this and show how hitchBOT with other robots are also examples of that. So cultural robotics follows more or less the idea that we want to focus more on the cultural context of robots and human beings and how they interact with each other. And the interesting thing about robots in our culture is they've always been there. They've always been an integral part of our culture. So if you look back in history, you can see, for example, that Greek mythology is full of robots. So there were some Greek gods who were able to build robots like Prometheus, Prometheus actually is still a big role model for lots of science fiction movies and stories, and also has been, or was the role model for Mary Shelley in Frankenstein. Hephaestus was the Greek god and blacksmith, actually. He was able to build automatons, so the colors of roads, for instance. And Pygmalion, the famous story around Pygmalion, deals with Pygmalion building a statue and then falling in love with the statue and being terribly unhappy until Aphrodite came along and said, okay, I'm going to help you. So now the statue is alive. And I don't think they lived happily ever after, but that's the story, and was later on adapted with famous from George Bernard Shaw and the famous play Pygmalion, or My Fair Lady too. Then later on we had the story of the Rabbi Löw and the Golem of Prague. So it's always this idea about us being able to form or build something new that can walk and interact with us, or basically something living. And very often the golem, for instance, was built from clay and was supposed to help the people in Prague and defend them from, I think it was the Turks who were about to enter. René Descartes, you might not necessarily connect with robots, but the story goes, he had a daughter, Francine, who sadly died at the age of 5, and he was so unhappy about it and heartbroken that he built a doll that looked like Francine and could move, and he would take her everywhere with him. Then we have, of course, when we look east, and we have the big automaton theater, and the first one was already open in 1662 in Osaka in Japan. In Europe, we have a very long-standing tradition too. So Jacques de Vaucanson and his artificial duck, and he built tons of artificial dolls, baby, that could move by themselves and were quite fascinating. It was a huge success. Wherever he'd go, he would tour around Europe with those. And then some of you might know one of the famous ones, kind of fake AI, artificial intelligence ones, is Wolfgang von Kempelen, and he built the so-called mechanical Turk, or the automaton chess player. I can show you an image here. You see in the upper left window, you see someone who looks like a Turkish person sitting in front of a chess player, and that was a doll and was able to play chess. And everybody was extremely fascinated by that, until later, of course, they found out. You see in this little cupboard below, there was a little person sitting, and steering him. So this is what we would call fake artificial intelligence nowadays. Or also, and interestingly enough, it's something that we still do in robotics experiments, what we call now Wizard of Oz scenario. So we have robots that appear to be able to interact with people and to talk, but really there's a human being behind it, steering it and manipulating it, like the wizard, the great wizard. And you see another picture here again of the golem, which is right next to the chess player. On the bottom, you see some of Vaucanson's work, for instance. Okay, so you can tell it's always been something we've always been really fascinated with the whole time. Why is that? There isn't really one reason we can say that. There's lots of different theories. Maybe it's about robots kindle or bring forth the child in us, right? So if you have robots and people and bring them together, they're usually intrigued and they're quite happy to see them, and they want to find out what's it about. So they They turn people into little researchers and scientists because they keep asking, how does it work? Can it talk? What can it do with it? There's also the other explanation saying humankind has always striven for being like God, basically able to create new life. Now, then there's many different robots, and we're going to talk about one specific category here today, but just to give you a very brief overview, this comes from my PhD work, which is ages ago, and there's certainly different categories or approaches, but this is what I came up with. So you can see there are so-called robot societies, which are usually imitating animals. They are based on the idea, like Rodney Brooks said, we should copy animals and their swarm behavior, for instance, because they are self-evolving. And they have a kind of swarm intelligence, so we can learn a lot from that. Then we have something, for want of a better word, which I call robot prostheses. So those are parts of robots that are supposed to help us. So artificial arm, artificial limbs, for instance, those famous robot skeletons that are supposed to help soldiers to become even better soldiers, whether we like that idea or not. Then one area that can be called robot protectors in a way. So we do have a lot of robots that do really difficult jobs for us because we send them into situations that are too dangerous for us. So robots who are sent to look after a bomb, basically make it go off in a safe environment, or the Mars rover, we're sending robots to space. Then this huge area of industrial robots, which has been there for ages, and we can't think of any kind of industrial work anymore that doesn't really involve robots. And then service robots, which include anything from entertainment robots. You can see here on the top the little Aibo dog from Sony that used to be a lovely little dog you could have at home and program yourself. Next to it you see the Roomba example, so a robot that can hoover for you. You see also edutainment robots that help us to learn new things, for example. Those are really, we can see here, there's a whole really huge variety of different robot species already. And we come up with lots of new ideas all the time. And we wonder, so what will it bring to us, or what will happen in the future? And this is what we are really interested in. And this is why we came up with with this kind of wacky idea of a hitchhiking robot. We can see also lots of robots in fiction, and this is what people very often think of first when they hear, oh, there's a robot coming, or I can see a robot. Fiction is very important for us. We are influenced by the media system, and fiction is part of that. So we have goodies and we have baddies in terms of robots too, where we differentiate from. And sometimes we tend to think of the bad versions and become a bit more apprehensive. But I think overall what people have, if you have a friendly-looking robot, they are quite open to it, which is fascinating. And then finally we have a category that David and I came up with, and I hand over to him, which is cultural robotics.
Thank you. So what you're seeing here is a picture of, now you're seeing this picture, of George Eliot Clarke, who's you may recognize as Toronto's poet laureate. And one of her earlier projects called My culturBOT. So My culturBOT is a poetry spouting robot, and what it's doing is remixing the journals of David Thompson, so the famous cartographer, explorer, fur trader. And it's remixing this using an algorithm that's not entirely producing sensical results. It's a bit of a word salad, but it gives a really kind of interesting and almost haiku-like rendition of the original diaries. And you begin to see these diaries in a new way. You're seeing the constant reference to David Thompson as a biologist, documenting the number of antelope seen in a particular area, or the catches of salmon on a particular river, or the number of beaver. And And then also as an anthropologist, his reflections on the First Nations people as he's traveling. And also math and measurement, right? So often all of the things that you would need as an explorer of a new territory. And we like this picture because we have our Toronto Poet Laureate contemplating the future of poetry from this little robotic creature in its midst. So the robot is basically traveling around in these poetry readings, and every once in a while it blinks, flashes, makes some interesting kind of R2-D2 noises, and prints a poem. And the poets, this was part of Canada's National Poetry Month, the poets accompanying the robot across the country on the train would have to read these poems and to give them the poetic inflection. So it was kind of a human-robot collaboration, something that we felt really emphasized the importance of speaking, of human inflection, and of human communication. Interestingly, we had some poets who went, well, robots can never do what poets do. In Russia, we value poets, and here in Canada, you're inventing robots to take their places. So what we have there is exactly what we'd hoped to do, which was to stimulate a reflexivity, or a reflexive, kind of self-questioning. What is it that makes poetry poetry? What is it that makes art art? And when we try to design a machine or an artificial intelligence application to be artistic or to be critical or to be expressive or poetic, what are the circumstances under which that happens? So this is what we mean by cultural robotics, is the creative use of robots and AI to kind of manifest a reflexive action highlighting construction of values, identities, and beliefs. Very much, as an artist, I'm inspired by early work of Norman White's. Norman taught at both Ryerson and was at OCAD for many years. This is a piece called Helpless Robot in 1987. And it's a wonderful, I think, I would call this a work of cultural robotics. At a time when our technologies, this is early, computational technologies, at a time when we're anticipating the wonderful Jetsons-like future that we're all heading for, when our technology will take over a lot of our hard work, will relieve us of some of the tedium of labor. Norman White invents a robot that when you walk into the room, it says, oh, could you help me, please, for a minute? I'm not very comfortable. Could you come over and just grab these handles and turn me slightly, and please? And so the gallery visitor turns the robot, and the robot thanks the person. And then, as the person starts to walk away, the robot says, oh, wait, come, could you move me back just a little bit? And this kind of escalates until the robot is screaming at the person, And so for any of you who thought, technology was going to, you would be the master of your technology, Norman was thinking, back in 1987 that actually it might be the other way around. And I'm sure many of you have commented to yourself, your friends, or your family, or observed of your children and relatives, are you a slave to that cell phone, or your computer? So cultural robotics, we're kind of looking at the continuum of innovation, science, and culture to ask these kind of larger framing questions for our research in technology. From our poetry and art critic robot, we moved to this idea of can a robot hitchhike? And literally, this was a middle of the night flash. We were thinking this idea of a message in a bottle. What could we actually produce in the way of an AI or cultural robotics piece that we could let go in the world? Because we know we enjoy the Voyager, the space probes, the satellites. We enjoy our comet and planetary exploratory robotics applications. We love the Mars rover. This is kind of an earthly, social, and cultural explorer. And once we began to ask this question, it was like a volcano of ideas and reflexivity. So, Victoria or bust. And one of the things immediately that came up was, oh, if we make, this is all Photoshop, by the way, folks, so don't be alarmed. So we started to Photoshop ideas, to make them, tangible so that we could consider them. This is a case of, if we create something and we let it go, how can we ensure public safety? These are questions that anybody who makes an autonomous robotic application will have to consider in the future. The other thing is, it's kind of maybe a threat politically. If any of you have crossed the American border recently, you know that things can get pretty tense. If we let this robot go and it has GPS and it's talking and maybe it takes a picture every once in a while, technically that's a spy device, or it could be classified as such. So, with Homeland Security, we began to worry about our personal safety. And then this is my lawyer shot. As we had these initial questions, we started to wonder, well, what about the legal ramifications? Is it possible to disincorporate or disinherit or disown something that you've invented? If you wanted to create an autonomous creature of some kind, can you release it into the world? So those of you who are familiar with corporate law, corporations have many privileges, and one of them is that they can dissolve, and suddenly, no one's responsible anymore, except, whoever is left holding the bag. So, again, interesting questions spawned by the project. To do this project, we realized that we needed an interdisciplinary team. So we have a couple of our research assistants who are here today. You can put your hands up. So there we go. Thank you for coming out. We have students from 2 and originally even 3 universities, different departments, so engineering, mechatronics, the social sciences and humanities, and from 2 universities. And this is actually, it's interesting for scientists, you're quite used to working in teams. In the humanities, it's mostly solo. So there's this really interesting kind of cross-cultural education, as it were, in developing innovative arts and science projects in terms of how do you do it, what kinds of teamwork do you need. So hitchBOT, as we say, is conceived as an art and science project together. And the idea was we wanted to kind of break the traditional research methods in science, where you would have a very controlled type of interaction where you could quantify everything and control the variables. We wanted something that we could release into the wild. And of course, there's sacrifices there to be made, and Frauke will address those later in terms of data collection. Our aim was to invite discussions on the questions of trust, safety, and relationships with technology. One of the things that we're probably all aware of is we're much more vigilant these days with children. For example, when I was young, parents would open the door and kick you out and say, okay, when the street lights come on, come back, right? Or when you hear me yell. And also, if in these annual surveys that they do in the US, every year they ask people, has crime gone up or down? What do you think? And every year they say it's estimated to have gone up by about 10%. In fact, crime has fallen dramatically since the 60s when many people hitchhiked. How many people have hitchhiked in this room, right? When you were hitchhiking, the crime rate was, I think, almost double, I think we're something like 40%, down 40% from the rates when we were hitchhiking. So the reasons why, our perceptions of social safety are diminishing while the actual crime rates are diminishing is a bit of a mystery. Some researchers suggest it has to do with the relationship of our public institutions. Our faith in public institutions reflects in our faith in each other. So raises very interesting questions about hitchBOT's experience in different countries. Our interaction modalities that we wanted for this robot, and by the way, this is the very early prototype. This was running down to the basement saying, okay, how could we do this? It has to be cheap because we may lose it. It has to probably be weatherproof. We're going to need to hide some electronics inside of it somewhere. And this was the very first kind of mock-up. And we wanted to have basically a hitchhiking signal, so the moving part is the hand. We also wanted to have the ability to have a conversation, so conversation modeling. And of course, we needed some Wellington boots because we knew we were going to be out in the dirt, the gravel, and the mud. Inside of hitchBOT, you have an Arduino, which is operating the face and the movable arm. We needed camera, audio, processor, GPS, Wi-Fi, all of these different devices, and we started to source them out independently, and one of our very brilliant engineering students said, that's a tablet. so hence the tablet. And then we have some open source software on there, CleverScript. CleverScript is not entirely open source. It's proprietary, developed in England. And it's a conversation modeling program. And we sat around, team members came to the house, worked independently, writing and writing and writing. So you have to write for conversational modeling. You either have to crowdsource what people actually say to each other, which we were able to access that data, but you also have to write the potential scripts that people will provide and what your robot will provide in response. And just for fun, it kind of looks like this. You're writing these giant spreadsheets. Things in double brackets are replaceable. They are linked to themes and keywords. And it's through that keyword recognition that hitchBOT and any of these CleverScript programs are able to carry out conversations. They're recognizing phrases and words and responding from either a prepared library of response or from a database, a crowdsourced database. We also had what we call good old-fashioned artificial intelligence, a sign, so people would know where to place hitchBOT safely at the side of the road to make sure they buckle up. You can see hitchBOT actually has a car seat built right into the base of it, and also the variety of power sources. We've got solar, we've got 12 volt, and also household current. So hitting the road, this is my daughter who never wants to see hitchBOT again. It just talked constantly in the car the whole time, so she wasn't very happy. We drove all the way to Halifax. Interesting from an arts perspective, we often talk, and we will talk about science engagement, but art engagement is also struggles, I think. This is a shot just outside of a gallery. We were in the gallery with hitchBOT on a very, very busy market day on the harbor of Halifax, and not a single person was coming into the gallery. We took the robot, we're just 8 feet outside of the gallery, and it was mobbed. So people are intimidated. Our institutions, that kind of house some of our disciplines, are not as accessible as being on the street. We left hitchBOT at the side of the road. This is day 1, minute 1, and this is minute 1 and 40 seconds later. So this first couple were heading off on a camping trip in the Gaspé. And we started then, this was us saying goodbye. We were there at the, you know, kind of hiding at the side of the road. And then we started to experience hitchBOT vicariously. So hitchBOT was taking its own photos and posting them to Instagram and Twitter. And we also had people beginning to get very creative and anthropomorphic with our robot. Our First Nations groups in Canada very much embraced hitchBOT. This is a powwow on Manitoulin Island. And hitchBOT here received an honorary name. It was a guest of honor at the powwow. And there'll be more on this later in the slide. This is another adventure. hitchBOT crashed a wedding. And this happy fellow, I believe, is the father of the bride. If you get close to hitchBOT, you'll see it has a crack in its acrylic cake saver head, and I believe this is from an accident on the dance floor. hitchBOT went dark for a few days. Sometimes people would unplug it and keep it at home. It was noisy, you know, it would talk to you while you're trying to sleep. And social media, you know, would start to get a little bit upset. So this, we discovered that hitchBOT was hanging out in a bar in Calgary, and it was actually hanging out with these guys. It's a rock band called The Wild. So it had some recording studio time. Arriving in Victoria, the Salish people embraced hitchBOT. They toured it all around Vancouver Island. And interestingly, and this would be something for the future, is they found there was a really interesting linguistic bridge between children and elders. And they're very much interested in exploring this idea of cultural robotics for endangered Indigenous First Nations languages. And I think I'll turn it over to Frauke to talk about the dimensions of human-robot interaction.
Right. Coming back to the more scientific part of it, when we design robots, it's all about the physical appearance, of course, and you've seen those slides, and David introduced that, but it's also about the interaction part. So how should it interact? David mentioned it was able to have some conversations. But I also said, to be honest, when we started talking about hitchBOT and just sending it out there and leaving it alone, I thought I was having a panic attack or something, because I was trained with, you know, traditional robotics experiments where you would never leave the controlled environment. And I thought, this is never going to work. But then I came up with this notion, or we came up with a notion where we have something that we can use actually, and that's the media and social media. And especially since robot is supposed to be a social robot, which means it has to have some kind of personality, I said, okay, you know, let's give it a personality and let's communicate it through its social media accounts. Well, my research assistants, when I first told them, I sat them down and said, okay, I want you to work out a social media strategy for me for a robot that's going to hitchhike across Canada. I think they thought I was entirely a nutter or something like that. But they did a fantastic job, and together we decided what kind of platforms it should have and how it should communicate, and we were very specific about that. So in terms of language, what kind of language use, how much slang, how much swearing, you know, we said, okay, it's going to have to, it will have a very broad audience, anybody basically interested in robots or hitchhiking. So that could be anybody from the age of, you know, 6 months to 100 plus, basically. That makes it, in terms of communication strategy, quite challenging. So far, and I'm very intrigued and very happy about the project and how it developed, because so far in human-robot interaction, media and social media doesn't really play a role. We have a few projects who use social media, but more, again, as a tool. So, you know, the smart computer behind the robot can access some people's Facebook accounts where you have images, and that helps the facial recognition of the robot, basically. for things like that, but never in such a really straightforward manner how we have done that. And the idea behind it is that in cultural robotics, we are interested about the cultural context. And social media is an integral part of it, and also traditional media. So we targeted both. So we can't really neglect it, and at the same time, we should try to make use of it. And then also when it comes to science and arts communication and public engagement, I think the media play a very essential role. So that's why we came up with the media strategy. And yes, that was the very innovative, also another innovative part of the project. So both media, social media and traditional media, aimed at building up popularity, because I said, okay, it's going to be there, sitting there at the side of the road, and seriously look at it. I mean, now it looks really fancy and dashing, but you saw the first versions, and I said, people really might think it's just some rubbish on the side of the street. So we have to put it out there. So we wrote press releases, we gave lots of interviews with hitchBOT, and by the way, hitchBOT isn't good in interviews, it always failed in talking, it would be just chatting away before, but then when it was on live camera, it would just be mute, we don't know why. So it seems to be a bit shy. We use them, as I said, to establish hitchBOT's identity and personality. So hitchBOT would talk about its hobbies, its family. That's very important when it comes to robots and social robots, because we want to see things that remind of us. And we always, try to relate ourselves in our own social habitat, in our context, and our history, our background is quite essential here. So we defined this in the team. So what kind of hobbies should it have? We decided it should be, of course, it's Canadian, so ice hockey, but also with my background should be European soccer, then baking, horse riding, all kinds of things. And we also we used social media especially to engage people from the beginning on, even before it started its trip. So we reached out on social media and asked, so what kind of wellies should hitchBOT wear? What kind of color, should its rubber gloves have? And people really liked being asked to design, become co-designers basically, and contributed. And the platforms we decided on, that was an interesting discussion actually, was in terms of social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Now, and I always keep telling everybody now, so my students at first agreed, and I said, yes, for sure, Twitter and Instagram. And back then, Facebook was again in the news of being said it's dead now, nobody uses Facebook anymore. But I said, no. Look at the user data. You can see I have a communications background. Look at the user data, and Canada is very interesting, because Canada has a very high penetration rate of Facebook users among all generations. And I said, I want all generations. And if we only use Twitter, we won't get older generations, or it's more unlikely. So we said, okay, a website, and you can see here the website, and what was very popular was having an interactive map on the website. And since hitchBOT has GPS on board, people could see on the website where it was every day. And we really received so many emails where people would tell us, oh, that was such a great experience the whole summer. Every day I would wake up, have my coffee, and then look up online where hitchBOT was now in Canada. A Storyfy, which is an online tool that lets you tell stories. So every day we added some images and pictures, and something that hitchBOT has done. We depended, of course, greatly on people who met hitchBOT to tell us about their experiences. And they did, and that was fantastic. Because we didn't follow it and we didn't tape any conversations, we had no idea. That was our big, that David mentioned before, compromise as researchers to say, okay, we really want people to trust this robot, and we really want people to have a choice what they do with it. So no recording, no manual, not telling them what to do with it, but letting them decide and become creative. And of course, the downside for us as researchers was we don't have any actual data on the actual interactions of people with hitchBOT. What we have, though, are stories that people told us, all the images online, and all the social media data. You will see soon why I'm so excited about that. Here you see the numbers of the Canada trip last summer. It was okay. That's confusing. So it was only, it wasn't very long, 26 days, and it took it only to cross the whole of Canada. And you can see here, it had, by the time it finished, it had 48,000 likes on Facebook, more than 12,000 followers on Instagram, and 35,000 followers on Twitter. So you see, it was a good idea to integrate Facebook in our social media strategy. We can see here also some images of people who sent us images or that we found on Twitter and online. So it was a rich source for us and everybody really. So here again, why Facebook was so important. More than 50% of its total media subscribers were on Facebook. And Facebook still remains to be very important, plus, of course, Twitter. What's also very exciting for us from a research point of view, and that shows also from cultural robotics, from that perspective, is usually when you do analytics of social media, right? You want to know how many people follow my account and how many tweets are there, for instance. Twitter is very interesting to analyze. And what you usually get, you get tons of tweets if you're good. That's, you know, you can see altogether we had 37,000 tweets from the Canada trip. And usually what you get then, that's what we know, is most of those tweets are so-called retweets. That means people just say, okay, click on retweet, I send it out to the same thing. I don't write anything on my own, I just think it's funny or whatever, and they just send it out again. That's how you get those high numbers usually. However, what you can see with hitchBOT, and that's why I'm so excited, is you can see most of those tweets were original content. This is what you see, OC, the 22,000. Original content, so more original content than just simply repeating what others have said. So that meant we were really able to instill quite some discussions online about this little robot, and people would talk about it, and it was amazing to see, and they would update each other. Where is it today? Look at the website. Why hasn't it moved for 2 hours? You know, I hope it's fine. hitchBOT, how are you? You know, it's unbelievable, the content we got. And you can also see in terms of HB posts. So one of our policies was to say not to have too many posts on its own. We really wanted people to be the most active part, the public, and it worked out. So I'm going to go through the next slides a bit faster because I want to leave some more time for questions. It was after that I was invited in February this year to go travel through Germany, which was, again, you can see the numbers. It was a great success. I had a jolly good time, and people were quite intrigued. We even managed to teach hitchBOT some German, which was very, very hard. It's a very complicated language. I can say that I am German, so, but I had a very good time there. Then, yeah, you can see some examples here. That's Frankfurt Airport. That's in Hamburg. Then I was invited to come to the Netherlands, and but for something special, not really to hitchhike, but on an arts vacation. So the region of Twente said, we have beautiful art and culture here, we want hitchBOT help us promote it. And we thought, since hitchBOT is an arts and science project, what a jolly good idea. So we did that. And it was a really nice success. It was interesting for us also to see in terms of social media, of course, with the quite a few feedback came back in Dutch, which is a bit hard for us to understand. And we didn't teach it Dutch. You know, that would have been too complicated. It spoke English. But people were fantastic. So they organized that when you go on a holiday, when you're really lucky, you have someone who shows you around the region, right? That's the best way to do it. And hitchBOT was very lucky because they organized, people could voluntarily subscribe and say, I want to, you know, on Wednesday, I want to show hitchBOT this area. On Saturday, I want to show hitchBOT that windmill or whatever. And it was so busy. It had a much better time than we had, actually. It saw so much of the Netherlands. Here you can see they even built a little companion for hitchBOT, plug, right? Here, hitchBOT has lots of fans among children, obviously. hitchBOT was even painted by an artist, and I thought that was such a crazy idea and wonderful. Really, really great. And then we had this biggest trip. We said, okay, that's going to be the ultimate challenge here now, sending it to the USA. You can see here our researcher team. So we had, after we finished all the preparations for that, we had a big party at our place. And you can see how hopeful we were all and excited. And it started off quite well. We had very nice statistics. People were really appreciative. Also, the traditional media in the United States loved hitchBOT. They called it a celebrity robot. We gave hitchBOT basically a bucket list to say what should it see in the States, and that was, again, to engage people. We asked people, so what should it see? And one was to do the wave at a game, so you can see it here. But then, sadly, maybe we shouldn't have given a bucket list, because the original meaning is could rise from, to kick the bucket. Then suddenly, after only 10 days, there must have been some people with a few issues, we don't know what and why, and they vandalized hitchBOT. So I'll never forget that day, because that was actually the second weekend of its trip, and the whole team was exhausted from all the work. We have to do 24/7 monitoring of all social media while it's away, so it's a lot of work. And we decided that was a long weekend to take it off. And I told all my students, RAs, okay, let's take some breath and just, enjoy the weekend, take it easy. And then we were just actually on the way on Saturday to a friend's house who had a fantastic pool. It was great weather. I was looking forward to that. And then we got this email, someone who found those parts here of the vandalized hitchBOT and sent them to one of our RAs. And of course, that was it with then the weekend was over, basically, so I had to call back all my RAs. We had some emergency conference calls, what to do. First was, of course, to verify the image. That was done quite quickly, and then to say, okay, what do we do? How to communicate now? And we were concerned. We decided not to publish that image because we found it quite upsetting, and we knew we had so many kids loving hitchBOT. And we also wanted, and then how do you communicate, let a robot communicate that it's basically dead? That's quite difficult. We hadn't thought about it, to be honest, because we were so spoiled by all its success, right? So many people helped it. And so we came up with this last tweet: my trip must come to an end for now, but my love for humans will never fade. Thanks, friends. So we wanted to be optimistic still, And what's interesting in terms of social media and outreach, they went to social media to really express how sad they were and how angry and disappointed, but mostly sad, and sympathize. We received wonderful tweets and emails. You can see here differences between, for instance, likes on Facebook. As to July 17th, that's when it started, it was 67,000. ADs after death, right? 114,000. The same with Twitter followers. When it started its trip, 35,000, and then after death, 64 suddenly. So it was unbelievable, those responses. And also what we really appreciated was also the media was quite sad, which resulted in, as to August 6th, there were more than 2 million hits on a search on Google News for hitchBOT. hitchBOT has now become some kind of cultural reference. We see still so many, on a daily basis, news media pieces appearing, mentioning hitchBOT, but now more, not really talking about hitchBOT, just mentioning hitchBOT as one important example, robot example, that everybody knows. But also what we really liked was to see, and this shows again the cultural robotics part, when you leave it open to the people, what to do with technology, we found out they become incredibly creative. Yeah, they embrace it. Instead of just saying, oh no, just leave it there at the side of the road, I don't care. They adopt it, they become creative, they do wonderful things with it. And we've seen so many people wrote songs about hitchBOT, they drew pictures, unbelievable. And this is how we'd like to end our presentation today. We're open for questions. That was an excellent visualization of the end of hitchBOT, and it also shows where we are still standing. We're still, it's still an open end to us. We're still not sure what to do next, except to appreciate the ongoing interest and cherish all the wonderful stories that we can tell about hitchBOT. Thank you.